Hey, I'm Hannah Grider, and my presentation is going to be on the life of King David. Perfection isn't always the key to God's heart. David had many attributes, but perfection was definitely not one of them. The Bible refers to David as a man after God's own heart. Actually, it refers to him twice. The first time was when Samuel anointed him as King Saul's successor, and the second time was the Apostle Paul, who recounted Israel's history. I thought about this topic a lot and really wanted to know what made David a man after God's own heart. I was thinking it can't mean that David was perfect, because he wasn't. So obviously being perfect is not a requirement, or else David would have been disqualified. Honestly, looking at all the mistakes David made and the sins he committed, he should have been dethroned, banished from Israel. He should have been executed because of his adultery and murder he committed. In fact, he should have even separated from God and damned eternally. These are things that would seem just. These are the things he actually deserved. But I found it very interesting that not only did these things not happen to him, but he was forgiven and God restored him. God showed mercy and grace to David by not allowing these things to happen to him. I looked up the difference between mercy and grace, and what I found was mercy is when God does not give you what you actually deserve. Grace is when God gives us what we do not deserve. So I thought about how God showed David mercy, not allowing him to be dethroned, banished, separated, and damned eternally. God also showed David grace by sparing his life, forgiving him, and restoring him. Judging by David's character, I couldn't explain how exactly he was a man after God's own heart. I realized that it was relating more indirectly. He was far from morally pure, but David was truly hungry for God. He sought after God and truly had a passion for spiritual things. He tried to please God despite all of his failures and faults. He wasn't purposely running after these mistakes because he was always running back to God. It was always God's intention for Israel to have a king, but it was to be God's choice. The unfortunate thing is they allowed their desire to be like other nations taint the process to what God's plan was. Saul was disqualified from kingship because of his lack of character and obedience to God. So Samuel said that God would pick the king and would be a man after God's own heart. What this meant was it would be God's choice. His choice of kings did not relate to a character. David was God's choice of king. Psalms is one of my favorite books of the Bible. David wrote many of the Psalms. He wrote 73 Psalms of worship. He truly loved God's presence and desired to be close, so he positioned the ark in Jerusalem 2 Samuel also tells us that he provided a tabernacle to house the ark. David supported and promoted musicians and singers to full-time worshipers since he could not do this all the time. David's heart never turned to idolatry like the other 40-plus kings of Israel. When researching and studying the life of David, I read in Psalms where he expressed his passion for God. Psalms 63:8 states, My soul follows hard after you. And I also read where David longed to be close to God. Psalms 42:1-2 says, As the deer pants after the water brooks, so pants my soul for you. O God, my soul thirsts for the living God. David knew the secret was to run to God and not away from him. David was far from perfect, but he kept pursuing God. David showed himself the complete opposite of Saul in every way. David waited on the Lord. He sought after the Lord above his own will. Even in his sin, he was sensitive to things of God. When David sinned, he was truly repentant. God knew this. He demonstrated his faith and was committed to following after God. Because he truly sought the Lord, David was extended mercy and grace and received God's forgiveness.